Waldorf Blofeld. Is it still worth it in 2020 when the synth market has changed so immeasurably since it was released 10, 12 years ago? Does this thing still hold up in terms of sound generation, in terms of its power, and has it got any unique features still that really make it stand out in 2020? Spoiler alert, I love this machine. I've had 4 of them now. This is my 4th one. That's because I think it's just got such an amazing amount of power for such a small price. Currently, around about £330 in the UK, brand new. You can check out for offers and you might better get a cheaper one. I will say up front is I try and steer clear of second-hand Blofelds, because while it feels beautifully made, the knobs are kind of machined aluminium, it's got a metal chassis, it feels like it's well built. In fact, it's not that well built. There's common issues with encoders going loose. I mean, my first encoder here, because it's the filter cutoff, is already loose after less than a year. I've read reports on forums and on Facebook that these things start to fail after a certain amount of time. Obviously, with abuse, it's going to go quicker, but I would say if you can spend a little bit more, because I mean, even on the second-hand market, you're paying $200 to $250 for them. Try and go for a new one, because then you just got more life in it. But like I say, this encoder already, which is the filter cutoff, is a little bit looser than all these other ones. Hopefully that's just going to stay that way. So a little bit of a tip straight up front there. So let's talk about the Blofeld. I'm not going to go too much into the architecture, but what I'm going to do is focus on where bits of the architecture are unique still, or have certain modifiers which make it stand out still, or just give it that unique Waldorf sound. Then we'll get into some sound generation, sound design, and then we'll maybe do a little jam at the end. So you've got a very standard signal flow here. You've got 3 oscillators, 2 oscillators, a wavetable as well. 1 oscillator is more like a sub-oscillator. It's not a sub-oscillator, but it's more like a sub-oscillator in that it's got just the virtual analog waveforms and no wavetables. Within those oscillators, there are some unique features, which I'll come back to once you get past the oscillator section. You've got a noise generator, you've got ring mod, you've got Unison. So there's some nice features there to expand your sound design possibilities. You can have it in poly mode or mono mode, so you can make lovely monophonic sounds as well. Moving into the filters, so it's 2 filters, can be run in serial or parallel. They are multimode filters from low pass 12 and 24 dB, high pass 12 and 24 dB, and you've got band pass, then you've got notch filters, then there's comb filters, positive and negative, and then you're into a PPG low pass. It's an emulation of the PPG filter, which has more character or a certain coloration of the sound which you don't find on the normal low pass filters. Within there is some unique modifiers and modulators again. Then you move into the envelopes. The envelopes are quite unique on this, in that you've got normal ADSR even, ADS1, DS2R, getting complex already. You've got one-shots and you've got looping envelopes. That's on filter, amp, and modulation envelopes as well. Sometimes the GUI is a little bit hard, or the matrix setup is a bit hard to find different things. For instance, to get to your other envelopes, to your modulation envelopes 3 and 4, you have to scroll past amp envelope. You can't get to it quickly that I know of on this modulation, on this editing matrix right here. Into LFOs, got 3 LFOs, basic standard stuff. Don't know whether they go up into audio rate. They go really, really quickly, not sure whether it's audio rate. Then you are into the piece de resistance of this particular synth is the modulation matrix. You've got, I believe, 16 modulation slots, and then you've even got modifiers, which I shall touch on a bit later. Gets quite geeky when you get to the modifiers. Then you're into standard amp section, couple of effect slots, and then the Arpeggiator, which is a very fully featured Arpeggiator. Then, one of the really unique things for this synth is the Multimode. You can have 16 sounds playing simultaneously, if you're lucky, in a multi-mode, which you can control via MIDI channels from whatever sequencer you want to use. You can address each channel individually, which I shall touch upon later, but that is one of the big things with this particular synthesizer. So there's a brief overview. Let's move back to the oscillators. The oscillators are virtual analog as well as wavetable. There's about 60 wavetables, 64 wavetables. Then there is into 66 wavetables into reserved wavetables, where you can load your own user wavetables. It's really clunky. I've not yet managed to succeed with this. There's only an app on the PC via Windows. There's no Mac app, and that is something Waldorf could be doing way better in 2020, as they are still selling this machine, is a better, or an app, full stop, to getting your own user wavetables on there. You can also buy the License SL add-on for the Blofeld, which comes with the Blofeld keyboard as standard. That allows you to put 60 megabytes of samples into the device, and then they kind of act as oscillators essentially from there on. I haven't got that. So I've got all the wavetables and the virtual analogs in here. There's loads of scope here. There's the PPG wavetables, microwave wavetables, as well as unique Blofeld wavetables in here. You've got anything from organs to formants to just very harsh harmonics, and then you've got sort of what they say at the end, true PWM, which is sort of a fat square wave. There's all sorts of scope here for sound design, along with the virtual analogs. Once you get past the raw oscillators themselves, then you're into the modulation you can do on this, and this is where the oscillator section really comes alive with the Blofeld. Each of the oscillators has pulse width available to it. Pulse width is available on the square wave, and then all the wavetables. Not the other virtual analogs, just the wavetables and the square, obviously, to give you PWM. And you can modulate this pulse width by using these parameters here, and then you use a PWM source, which can be any of the LFOs, the amps, key tracking velocity, release velocity, poly pressure, so polyphonic pressure. Quite an early device to have that in there. I think that's what that is as well. Please correct me in the comments down below if that is wrong. There's all sorts of sources for the PWM, and as you'll find as you go through this synth, there's a lot of sources that you can use to modulate lots of things in this synth. As you move through it, so first of all, what I want to say there is you can do PWM across all those wavetables and the square, as I've said, without even touching the modulation matrix. There's going to be more of that in just a moment. Limit wavetables. So some of the waves have analog waves in them as well. I've never really heard the difference with this. I think it's a subtle. These two are very, very subtle. Limit wavetable and brilliance. Some of the old wavetables in this from the microwave and the PPG have analog waveforms in them as well, and this can limit the analog being there or not. So it will change the character of the sound very slightly, but it's really, really subtle, as is the brilliance, which adds upper harmonics, upper frequencies, higher frequencies into the sound. Even the manual says you might need to get a child, I think it is, to hear the difference here. It's subtle. You need to really find a sweet spot in some of the wavetables before you can hear those differences. And then we've got FM. So this is almost like an oscillator modifier. It modulates, obviously, the oscillator against an FM source. The FM sources can be oscillator 1, 2, and 3. You can use the noise. You can use the LFO. So, a fast LFO will get you into those real glassy, bell-like tones. And, again, we're not even touching the modulation matrix this stage of the sound design process. And you can dial in an amount that's relevant for that particular sound. Here we hit across one of the first bugs in the Blofeld synth is if you have a held note or a held chord pattern and you start messing with the FM amount, it won't make any difference until you do a note off. So you need to release those notes and then press the notes again. Then it'll work in real time. It's just one of those little quirks of the Blofeld, and it can catch you out really, really massively under headphones if you suddenly don't know, why is that not working? Why am I not getting it? And you release the note and then hack down on some notes again, and it can be massively loud or gritty or horrible. So just be careful there. So again, that's one of the more unique parts of the oscillator section is you can modulate the oscillator against FM. You can use itself to become an FM source. Obviously this is not an FM synth, but it can still give you some of those glassy metallic tones. So that's the main part of the oscillators there. Then you'll get into the noise section, whether it's poly or mono, whether you are in ring mod, and then you've got Unison. This is up to a 25 voice synth. The box in the early days suggested it could be up to 50. That was later revised and it's up to 25. The more Unison you dial in, the more you're likely to hear note stealing. You just can start hearing it picking some notes away, but it's rare, and if you keep the sounds relatively complex but yet simple, not too much Unison, because there's so much else you can do with the sound, you're going to rarely hear that voice stealing. Moving into the filter section, so you can move around the UI just with this knob here all the way through, or you've got some quick buttons here to take you to the different sections. Sometimes you can, if you want to get to the noise section, you can go to filter first and just go back one step and you're into the noise. It's just one of those quick little hacks with this. I've given you the rundown on what the filters do. I want to talk about modulation again here. We're not going to touch the matrix just yet. So you've got a mod source, which will be to modulate the filter up and down or via an envelope. So you can use your LFOs, you can use envelopes, you can use key track and velocity, all those same things again. You've also got an envelope amount over here. So again, before you even get into the modulator, you can add an amount of envelope, which is very normal with filters, as you probably well know if you come from a synth background. But then you can have another mod source here to modulate this filter. So that's the same 1 and 2, filters 1 and 2. The filters are the same, they're both the same, there's no limitations once you get to filter 2. You've also got an FM source again for the filters, and they're all the same sources all over again. So as I keep saying, we're not even touching the mod matrix just yet, but yeah, you've got all these different modulation sources right up front before you touch that mod matrix. There's drive in the filters, so you've got different algorithms for the drive. Some can sound nice, some can sound brittle and horrible, but it's a nice bit of a character for your sound. I will say that I love the filters on this thing. Don't expect analog lushness, expect digital harshness with an amount of sweet spots in there. When you crank up the resonance, there is some beautiful sweet spots in that filter. I wouldn't go as far as say it's musical or beautiful. I can just say it's very interesting, very unique, and it's just got huge amounts of scope. When you touch into the comb filters, you got this beautiful phasing going on, which can really add to a sound. And it's about dialing in just the right amount for that particular sound that you're working on. Also, you can pan each filter, so you can pan the filters left and right, and I'm going to go back to the oscillator section quickly here, because one thing I didn't show is you can pan each oscillator to filter 1 or filter 2 or somewhere in between, and that can add some real unique touches to your sound design, because you can send one of the oscillators to filter 2, one to filter 1, and then you can pan those filters around and you can get this really spatial stereotype sound going on. So it is really very, very powerful. Again, I said earlier, you can route parallel or serial with the filters. Then you're into the envelopes. The envelopes, I say, the most unique part here is the different types of envelopes. You've got these A, D, S1, D, S2R, and you can control the main part of the envelope with these encoders here, which is very, very normal. Then to get to the other parts of the envelopes, you need to start using these knobs here. So I like the way the Blofeld works when you're coming to this sort of matrix style editing. I think Waldorf have got this really licked. Some people don't like this, some people feel it's a bit too menu divey. I know this synth really, really well, and I don't see it being an issue at all. I really, really like it. You've got the one-shot filters, and you've got looping filters, so it will loop between S1 and S2. So it's that same ADS1, DS2 filter, but you are looping between those 2 points, which can, again, add some really unique sound capabilities and possibilities to your sound. That goes across all the envelopes, every single envelope, the amp envelope. Your modulation envelopes can have that too. Modulation even has a loop all, so that loops the whole envelope, not somewhere in between like S1 and S2. Very, very powerful. Nothing too surprising in the LFOs, all the usual shapes in there. You can sync it. You can sync it to MIDI clock or sync it to the tempo within the device. again, all your usual stuff with an LFO. Again, you can go really, really fast with these. If I just get to the speed of this, you can't really see it on the screen here, but that's a really, really fast LFO there. And when you get to sort of your random and your sample and holds, it's nice they've differentiated the two there, because sample and hold isn't genuinely random. Read into that. There's lots to be said about the differences there, but when it comes to this, it's nice to be able to fade in an LFO, and fade in one of these random LFOs just gives you a really nice, if you're going really, really quick with that LFO, it gives a really gritty sound to your gritty feel to your sound. Then the modulation matrix, 16 mod slots, so many different sources here, absolutely chock full of sources from all the LFOs, all your envelopes, LFOs with pressure, LFOs with mod wheel. Then you're into velocity and release velocity, pressure, pitch bend, mod wheel, sustain. There is just stacks in here, as well as stacks of different destinations. The only thing that in 2020 that I would love to see in this is the ability to modulate the effects, or some of the effects parameters. When you look at something like the Argon 8, which is just sitting off camera there, or a DeepMind, you can modulate the FX. And I've got experience with both of them, and it really does add something to your sound. So you can't do that on here, which is just one of its downsides. Like I say, we're comparing this 2020 to what's available on the market. That's one of the areas where it does lack. You can get a lot out of it without worrying about that. So you've got pitch FM, PWM amount. You can obviously do the filters, the noise, the ring mod level, right through to modulating the LFOs themselves, modulating envelopes, and so on and so forth. What you can see there is modifier. Modifiers, if we just scroll through to the modifiers, are essentially pushing two modulation sources together with a operand in the middle. So plus, minus, divide, times, and, or, XOR. You know, this is going into serious, like I said earlier, geek territory. It's powerful. I never use it though, so it's one of those things. If your mileage may vary on this, it's hugely powerful. It can add something to your sound, but you know what? It's the value of it can be debatable in some patches. I've managed to do so much on this without worrying about those. Still really good to have that option, and you can even modulate the modifier amount. So you can even use modifier 2 to modulate its own amount. Very, very, very powerful. So there's the mod matrix, hugely powerful. Then you're into effects and arpeggiator. So the effects are, again, 2020 we're looking at here. This is where it falls down a little bit. The effects are adequate. They do a job. They can add some space to a sound. With a flanger, you can get a beautiful ringing sort of texture out of a sound in certain long held sounds, or even like a bell-like sound. It can add something to it. But once you get past those little sweet spots, it starts sounding a bit okay, you know. Reverbs, again, it's all right. It's not massively great. You've got delays in there. You've got choruses. A lot of the effects you can't tweak real time because they had a clicking to the sound, which is a shame. From a live environment, that is a real shame. But they do the job. You've got two effect slots when you're in single mode. When you're multi-mode, they get trimmed down, so you can only have a certain amount of effects. I think it's 5 effects across the whole multi-mode, not per sound. But you know, the effects there, they do their job. Actually, they're okay. When you look at something like the Argon there, or the Minilog XD, for instance, the effects are nice, way nicer. So it does let it down a little bit. Arpeggiator's got all the normal stuff that you'd expect to see. You've got different patterns that are pre-programmed in. You can have it, you know, held on, clock mode, all that sort of good stuff that you would normally see. Then you get into the nuts and bolts of the arpeggio, where you can change each step to be normal, paused. It can go backwards. It can go back to the first step. Really powerful. We can have accents, you know, kind of like on your 303s where you have an accent. to make us part of that a little bit louder. You've got glide, again, very 303-like in that sense. You've got timing, so you can push the timing of each step on and off the tick, essentially. And you can do that for every single step of the arpeggiator. You can have length, so it can, you know, hold the gate open for longer. So it's basically gate length, holds the note. And back to the step just quickly, you can have chords on these steps somewhere. I can't find it now. There we are. Chord. So you can turn it into a chord, so it will play a chord of some description at that point. Really, really powerful arpeggiator. And that summarises everything there. I'm going to come to the multi-mode later on. But as I showed you, it has a multi-mode. But we are going to come back to that later on. So let's get into some sound design. Now you know the basic structure of the Blofeld.